The Meadowbrook Estates sign gleamed in the sunlight as I drove past it for the first time, its polished granite and gold lettering promising luxury and exclusivity. After 15 years of apartment living in the city, this quiet suburb of Phoenix was exactly what I needed. My name is Daniel Morgan, and at 42, I'd finally saved enough from my engineering job to afford my dream home. A modest 3-bedroom ranch on a quarter-acre lot backing up to a small nature preserve. "You're going to love it here," Mr. Morgan, Melissa, my realtor, had gushed. "Meadowbrook has the best schools, the lowest crime rate, and those mountain views. Plus, the HOA keeps everything pristine. That's why the property values keep climbing." The HOA fees seemed reasonable enough. $175 monthly for common area maintenance, a community pool, and a small gym. The covenant looked standard. Restrictions on exterior paint colors, lawn maintenance requirements, holiday decoration guidelines. Nothing I couldn't handle for the sake of neighborhood harmony. At my first neighborhood barbecue, I met Walter Jenkins, the HOA president. In his early 60s, Walter had the permanently flushed face of someone who enjoyed his scotch, matched by a booming voice that commanded attention. He'd been president for 15 consecutive years. "We run a tight ship here at Meadowbrook," he announced, clapping me on the back hard enough to make me choke on my beer. "Keep your grass cut, your hedges trimmed, and your trash cans hidden, and we'll get along just fine." His wife, Deborah, the HOA treasurer, stood nearby with a perpetual tight-lipped smile. "We've maintained our property values through 2 recessions," she added. "That doesn't happen by accident." My next-door neighbor, Eleanor Wu, a retired teacher who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 20 years, caught me alone later. "Just be careful," she whispered. "Walter doesn't just enforce the rules, he enjoys it. And ever since they discovered that the nature preserve might be rezoned for commercial development, he's been different." I brushed off her warning. How bad could it be? 3 weeks later, I found the first violation notice taped to my front door. Urgent. Non-compliance with Article 7, Section 3, Mailbox Standards. Apparently, my black mailbox was unauthorized. Only Meadowbrook Bronze was permitted. The fine was $50, plus $25 daily until resolved. I checked the manual. The mailbox color requirement was buried on page 43 in microscopic font. When I called the HOA office to explain I just moved in, the secretary sounded almost gleeful. "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse, Mr. Morgan. President Jenkins is very clear about that." As I replaced my perfectly functional mailbox the next day, I noticed Walter watching from across the street, binoculars hanging from his neck. He gave me a curt nod of approval before turning his attention to another neighbor's yard. I had the unsettling feeling I'd just passed my first test. The real trouble started in April, about 3 months after I moved in. Arizona's spring had transformed my backyard into a riot of wildflowers, a happy accident from the previous owner's scattered seeds. I was admiring the colorful display while enjoying my morning coffee when a sharp knock interrupted my peace. Walter Jenkins stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, wearing what I'd come to recognize as his official HOA inspection outfit: khaki shorts, a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook logo, and a baseball cap that read HOA Enforcement in bold letters. "Morning, Morgan," he said without smiling. "Got a situation here." He thrust a violation notice into my hands. Critical violation. Unauthorized landscape modifications. Article 12, Section 8. $250 fine plus immediate remediation required. "What landscape modifications?" I asked, genuinely confused. Walter pointed accusingly toward my backyard. "Those wildflowers. They're not on the approved plant list, and they're encroaching on HOA common space." I followed him to my backyard fence. The wildflowers had indeed spread to a small strip of land between my property line and the nature preserve, maybe 3 feet wide. "That's not even my property," I argued. Exactly, Walter's eyes narrowed. You've illegally planted non-native species on HOA land. Environmental contamination could affect the whole ecosystem. I didn't plant anything. They're just wildflowers that spread naturally. Your property, your responsibility, he said firmly. The board meeting is Thursday. You can appeal then, but the fine stands until a decision is made. And I expect those weeds gone by tomorrow, or it's an additional $100 per day. I spent the rest of my weekend ripping out beautiful wildflowers. At the board meeting, I presented my case calmly, explaining I hadn't planted anything, and the flowers were actually native species beneficial to local pollinators. Deborah Jenkins cut me off mid-sentence. Mr. Morgan, the approved plant list exists for a reason. Exceptions lead to chaos. The 5 board members, Walter, Deborah, and 3 elderly neighbors who never spoke, voted unanimously to uphold the fine. As I left, Walter stopped me. By the way, we've been meaning to install a proper fire break between the properties and the preserve. Since you're the newest homeowner on that border, the board has decided your fence needs to be moved in by 6 feet. What? That would cut off a significant chunk of my property. Actually, Walter smiled coldly. According to our surveys, that land has always belonged to the HOA. You've been using it temporarily, that's all. We'll need you to relocate your fence at your expense within 30 days. He handed me another notice with a crude drawing showing a new property line that would slice off nearly 500 square feet of what I'd purchased. This is ridiculous, I said. I have a deed that clearly shows. The HOA covenants you signed give us easement rights, Walter interrupted. Check your paperwork, Morgan. We'll be in touch about the fence contractor. We only use approved vendors, of course. As I watched him stride away, I realized Eleanor's warning had been right. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I pulled out my property deed and the complete HOA covenant, determined to find proof that Walter's claims were bogus. After hours of reading mind-numbing legalese, I discovered something odd. The easement clause Walter mentioned gave the HOA access rights for utilities and emergencies, but nothing about permanent property adjustments. Armed with this knowledge, I consulted a real estate attorney, Jessica Torres. She reviewed my documents with narrowed eyes. This is problematic, she said finally. The easement doesn't give them the right to take your land, but she pointed to a vaguely worded clause. This gives the HOA board discretionary authority to adjust common area boundaries for community benefit. It's unusual language, possibly unenforceable, but they're using it as justification. While I pondered my next move, more violation notices arrived. My garbage can was visible for 12 hours instead of the permitted $8.75 fine. My garden hose wasn't a board-approved color, $50, and apparently, I'd parked a commercial vehicle in my driveway overnight. Though it was just my regular Honda with a small company logo on the door, $150. The following Saturday, Eleanor knocked on my door, looking nervous. They're targeting you, she whispered, dancing around. It happened to the Patels last year. They wanted to build a playground where the Patels' house stood, so they harassed them with fines until they sold. That's insane, I replied, and illegal. The Patels thought so too. But fighting the HOA is expensive, and Walter's brother-in-law is on the city council. She handed me a folder. I've been collecting evidence. Walter and Deborah have been buying surrounding properties through shell companies. And look at this zoning application. They want to convert the entire nature preserve border into commercial space. The documents showed preliminary plans for shops and restaurants, with parking lots extending into what was currently residential property, including my backyard. They need your land for the parking lot, Eleanor explained. The commercial developers won't proceed without adequate parking, and the city won't approve rezoning without the developer's commitment. Later that week, I received a certified letter informing me that due to repeated covenant violations, The HOA was placing a lien on my property for $2,875 in unpaid fines. Additionally, they were implementing a special assessment of $5,000 per household for critical infrastructure improvements along the nature preserve boundary. That evening, I found Eleanor in my driveway, trembling. "They know I've been helping you," she said. "Walter just threatened to fine me for unauthorized food preparation because I make kimchi in my garage. He called it a biological hazard and said he'd need to inspect my house weekly." I was furious. This has gone beyond ridiculous. "There's more," Eleanor continued. I overheard Deborah on the phone. "They've hired a surveyor to reinterpret the property lines for all homes along the preserve. They're trying to claim a 6-foot strip from everyone, not just you." That night, I created a neighborhood group chat, excluding known Jenkins supporters. "Emergency meeting at my house tomorrow. HOA is attempting to seize property from multiple homeowners. Bring your deeds. Tell no one on the board." 20 anxious neighbors crowded into my living room the next evening. Each had stories of harassment, arbitrary fines, and now, property disputes. The pattern was clear. The Jenkins were systematically targeting homes that bordered the valuable commercial development opportunity. "We need to stand together," I told the group. "Individually, they can break us. Together, we have a chance." Little did I know, Walter had already planned his next move, one that would push me to my breaking point. I woke to the rumble of heavy machinery. Dashing outside in my pajamas, I found a catastrophic scene. A bulldozer was tearing up my backyard, ripping through my garden and flattening my fence. Walter stood nearby with 2 uniformed security guards and a woman holding a clipboard. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the engine noise. Walter signaled the operator to pause. "Emergency easement enforcement," he replied calmly. "You were informed about the property line adjustment. I never agreed to this. You can't just bulldoze my property." Actually, the woman with the clipboard interjected. "I'm Vanessa Mills, Meadowbrook HOA Council. The covenant you signed gives the association right of access for community improvements." She handed me a document. "This court order authorizes today's action." I scanned the paper. It was indeed a temporary order, granted just yesterday, allowing the HOA emergency access to install a firebreak. The hearing had happened without my knowledge. This is insane. You can't get a court order without notifying me. Notice was posted on the community bulletin board as required. Vanessa replied with a practiced smile. Section 18.3 of the Covenant states that's sufficient for emergency measures. My blood boiled as I watched the bulldozer destroy my carefully tended garden. The firebreak they were creating sliced 6 feet into what was clearly my property according to the deed. Even worse, they were installing concrete footers, preparations for something more permanent than a firebreak. "Stop this right now, or I'm calling the police," I shouted. "Go ahead," Walter smirked. "My brother-in-law is the police captain. But if you interfere with a court-ordered project, these officers will arrest you for obstruction." The security guards, who I now noticed wore actual police badges, nodded meaningfully. I stood helpless as they continued their destruction. Neighbors began gathering, watching in shocked silence. Eleanor approached with tears in her eyes. "They did the same to the Patels," she whispered. "This is just the beginning." By afternoon, a neat line of concrete footers had been installed across my former backyard, and similar work had begun on 3 neighboring properties. The bulldozer had also cleared a swath of the nature preserve. Apparently, Walter's environmental concerns didn't apply to his own projects. That evening, I received another certified letter, a $7,500 fine for unauthorized landscape structures that had been discovered and removed during routine maintenance. They were charging me for destroying my own garden. The final straw came the next morning. I found Walter and Deborah in my driveway with a real estate agent. We're assessing property values for the upcoming special assessment, Walter explained smoothly. Given your property's diminished condition, we're adjusting your contribution accordingly. You caused the diminished condition, I sputtered. Unfortunate, but necessary, Deborah replied. By the way, there's been interest from developers in purchasing homes along this row. Given your financial situation, she glanced meaningfully at the lion paperwork in her hand. You might consider their offer. We could waive the outstanding fines as a courtesy. Now it was crystal clear. This wasn't just harassment. It was a calculated land grab. They were trying to force me and my neighbors to sell at reduced prices so they could flip the properties to commercial developers. That night, I couldn't sleep. Years of savings had gone into this home, and now I was watching it be systematically destroyed. The injustice burned in my chest. At 3 a.m., I made a decision. Opening my laptop, I typed, "How to legally destroy a corrupt HOA." Then I called Jessica Torres and left a message. I need to meet first thing tomorrow. I'm ready to go nuclear. The Jenkins had pushed me too far. Now they would learn what happens when you corner an engineer who has nothing left to lose. Jessica Torres' law office smelled of leather and determination. Early morning sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds as she reviewed the additional documents I'd brought. Photos of the destruction, copies of arbitrary fines, the court order obtained without proper notice, and most importantly, my property deed and the original subdivision plats I'd obtained from the county records office. "This is more serious than I initially thought," she said, tapping a manicured nail on the plats. "These original surveys don't match what they're claiming. According to these, your property line extends 3 feet further than even you thought, meaning they've taken 9 feet, not 6. Can we sue them?" I asked. "We can, but HOA litigation is expensive and time-consuming. They have a legal fund built into their budget specifically for this purpose." She leaned forward. "But I see something unusual here. This HOA was established in 1985, but there's a sunset clause." "A what?" "A provision that the HOA charter must be renewed every 25 years by a 2/3 homeowner vote. According to my calculation," she checked her calendar, "the last renewal would have been in 2010. My heart raced. Did that happen? That's what we need to find out. Jessica's smile was predatory. If they missed that renewal, everything they've done since could be invalid. Over the next week, I became an investigative machine. By day, I worked my regular engineering job. By night, I dug through county records, HOA meeting minutes, and property archives. Eleanor helped, connecting me with longtime residents who might remember a 2010 charter renewal vote. None did. Meanwhile, I needed allies. I'd organized another secret neighborhood meeting, this time at Eleanor's church where Walter's surveillance couldn't reach. 40 homeowners attended, nearly a third of Meadowbrook. "They're not just targeting border properties anymore," said Frank Delgado, who lived near the community center. "I received a notice that my fence is 3 inches too high, with a $2,000 fine. They claimed my solar panels violate aesthetic standards," added Patricia Johnson. "They weren't installed last month. They've been there for 7 years." I presented what I'd found. Walter and Deborah had been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom. Financial records showed they had awarded maintenance contracts to companies they secretly owned. The reserve fund had mysteriously decreased by $80,000 with no explained expenditures. And most importantly, there was no record of a 2010 charter renewal vote. Without that vote, the HOA may have been operating illegally for 15 years, I explained. Every fine, every rule they've created since then could be invalidated. The energy in the room shifted from resignation to hope. We formed committees, one to research legal options, another to gather evidence of financial impropriety, and a third to examine the property line claims. 2 days later, Jessica confirmed our suspicion. The charter renewal had never happened. Walter had simply continued operations as if it had, and no one had questioned it. We filed an emergency injunction to halt all HOA actions pending a legal review of their authority. Walter's response was swift and vicious. The next day, every person who had attended our meeting received multiple violation notices. Security cameras appeared on street corners. Walter circulated a letter accusing me of attempting to destroy property values with baseless claims. He underestimated us. Patricia, who worked at the local newspaper, published an exposé on the suspicious financial dealings. Frank, a retired accountant, analyzed 15 years of HOA financial statements and found evidence of embezzlement. Eleanor organized a petition demanding immediate elections for a new board. The turning point came when we discovered the bombshell. In the original subdivision filings, the strip of land between our properties and the nature preserve wasn't HOA common space at all. It had been designated as a conservation easement, with strict limitations on development. Walter and Deborah had been quietly working to have this designation changed through their political connections. Armed with this information, we filed a formal complaint with the county against Walter Jenkins, Deborah Jenkins, and the entire HOA board for fraud, embezzlement, and violation of conservation regulations. The day after our filing, I found my car's tires slashed and a note on my windshield. Back off or worse will happen. Security camera footage showed Walter's son skulking around my house at 2 a.m. Rather than intimidating me, it energized our cause. We now had evidence of criminal intimidation to add to our case. "They're getting desperate," Jessica observed. "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." She was right. Walter's biggest mistake was yet to come. The weather matched the mood in Meadowbrook. Dark clouds gathered as whispers spread through the community. Our legal actions had created visible cracks in Walter's facade of control. 2 board members resigned after the embezzlement allegations became public. The county commissioner launched an investigation into the conservation easement tampering. Most significantly, homeowners stopped paying HOA dues, citing the expired charter. Walter called an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse. Despite his intention to regain control, the massive attendance worked against him. Nearly every household was represented. Many residents I'd never even seen at HOA functions before. "These baseless attacks on our community must stop," Walter declared, his face mottled with rage. "Morgan and his conspirators are threatening the stability and property values we've worked so hard to maintain." A chorus of disapproval rose from the crowd. Patricia Johnson stood up. "Is it baseless that you've awarded $450,000 in landscaping contracts to Green Valley Services, which is registered to your sister's address?" Frank Delgado was next. "Is it baseless that the reserve fund shows withdrawals of $15,000 per quarter for consulting fees to Meadowbrook Management Services, a company owned by you and your wife?" Walter banged his gavel frantically. "These questions are out of order. This meeting is about the unauthorized campaign to undermine HOA authority." "What authority?" I called out, rising to my feet. "The HOA charter expired 15 years ago. Every rule, fine, and action since then has been legally questionable at best, fraudulent at worst." The room erupted. Neighbors began shouting out grievances. Years of petty tyranny finally being called to account. Deborah Jenkins tried a different approach, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Everything we've done has been to protect Meadowbrook's value. The commercial development would bring prosperity to all homeowners. By stealing our land," Eleanor challenged, "by forcing people out of their homes." Cornered, Walter made his fatal error. "The HOA has legal right to all buffer zones as defined in the master plan. The original developer granted us that authority." Jessica Torres stood up from the back of the room. "That's fascinating, Mr. Jenkins, because I have the original master plan right here." She held up a thick document. "It specifically designates all buffer zones as conservation easements that cannot be developed or transferred, ever. The room fell silent as Jessica continued. Furthermore, I've confirmed with the county that no request for easement modification has ever been properly filed. Only backdated paperwork submitted after construction had already begun. Walter's face drained of color. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "This meeting is adjourned," he shouted, grabbing Deborah's arm and pulling her toward the exit. "Actually," said Frank Delgado, blocking their path, "according to the expired bylaws you claim to follow, a majority of homeowners can call for a no-confidence vote at any community meeting. I move for an immediate no-confidence vote in the current board," Eleanor called out. "Seconded," multiple voices echoed. Walter and Deborah watched in horror as nearly every hand in the room rose to support the motion. The few abstentions were mostly elderly residents who looked confused by the proceedings. "You can't do this," Walter shouted. "I've given 20 years to this community and taken plenty in return," someone muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. By meeting's end, a provisional board had been elected, with Eleanor as interim president. Walter and Deborah stormed out, but their departure felt symbolic. The community had reclaimed its power. The next morning, I woke to the sound of machinery again. But this time, it was county officials removing the concrete feuds from my property and marking the true boundaries. The county had issued an emergency stop work order on all HOA construction pending their investigation. Our victory felt imminent, until my phone rang. It was Jessica, her voice tight with urgency. "Walter just filed emergency papers with the court claiming homeowner rebellion is causing irreparable harm to the community. He's requesting appointment of a receiver to take control of Meadowbrook and force compliance with HOA directives. Can he do that? It's a desperate move, but with his connections, we can't take chances." More concerning, the commercial developer has filed supporting documents claiming they have millions invested in the project already. I felt a chill. Money and political connections could still overpower justice. "The hearing is tomorrow morning," Jessica continued. "But I found something in the original development documents that Walter missed. Something that changes everything." "What is it?" I asked. "Not over the phone," she replied. "Meet me at my office in an hour. Bring Eleanor and anyone else on the new board. This is bigger than we thought." As I hung up, I noticed an unmarked van parked across the street, a camera lens visible through its tinted window. The final battle was about to begin. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Raymond Ortiz entered. Nearly half of Meadowbrook's residents packed the gallery, with Walter and his remaining supporters clustered on one side, our group on the other. The corporate lawyers for Pinnacle Development, the company behind the commercial project, occupied the front row, their expensive suits and leather briefcases screaming money and influence. Walter looked smug as his attorney presented their case. "Your Honor, these insurgent homeowners are destroying a well-established community governance structure. Mr. Jenkins has devoted decades to maintaining Meadowbrook's prestige. This reckless campaign has already caused property values to decline by threatening a development project that would benefit the entire region." Jessica remained calm, waiting her turn. The previous night, she had revealed what she'd found in the county archives. The original 1985 land grant that established Meadowbrook Estates. When Jessica rose to speak, her confidence was palpable. "Your Honor, this case isn't about homeowner rebellion. It's about the systematic abuse of power and fraudulent actions by the Jenkins family. We have 3 key points to present." She methodically laid out our evidence: the expired charter, the financial improprieties, and the conservation easement violations. Walter's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Ortiz allowed Jessica to continue. Most crucially, Jessica said, "We've discovered that the original land grant for Meadowbrook Estates contained a reversion clause." She submitted a document to the court. This clause, signed by the original developer, states clearly that if the HOA charter ever lapsed for more than 1 year, governance would revert to a homeowner cooperative model, with equal ownership of all common areas distributed among property owners. Walter jumped to his feet. That's absurd. I've never seen this document. Judge Ortiz glared. Sit down, Mr. Jenkins. You'll have your chance to respond. Jessica continued. According to county records, the charter lapsed in 2010, when no renewal vote was held. By the terms of the original agreement, the HOA legally ceased to exist in 2011, and all common properties should have been redistributed to homeowners. Instead, Mr. Jenkins continued operating as if nothing had changed, collecting dues and enforcing rules without legal authority. The judge studied the documents with a furrowed brow. Ms. Torres, are you suggesting that the HOA has been operating illegally for 14 years? Precisely, Your Honor. Furthermore, all contracts entered into by the HOA during this period, including the development agreement with Pinnacle, are null and void. The Pinnacle lawyers whispered urgently among themselves. Walter's attorney attempted damage control. Your Honor, even if there was an administrative oversight regarding the charter renewal, the homeowners accepted the HOA's authority through their continued participation. They can't suddenly claim it never existed. Actually, Jessica countered, case law is clear that homeowners cannot implicitly consent to an authority that legally doesn't exist. The reversion clause was automatically triggered in 2011, whether anyone realized it or not. Judge Ortiz called a brief recess to review the documents. When court resumed, his expression was stern. This case presents extraordinary circumstances. The evidence of charter expiration is compelling, as is the reversion clause in the original development agreement. I'm ordering a forensic audit of all HOA finances since 2010. In the interim, I'm freezing all HOA accounts and halting any construction or development activities. Walter's face turned crimson. This is outrageous. That development deal is worth millions. Mr. Jenkins, the judge warned, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. As Walter seethed, Jessica delivered her masterstroke. Your Honor, given the reversion clause's automatic trigger, we request immediate implementation of its terms, specifically, the equal distribution of common area ownership to all current homeowners. The judge nodded thoughtfully. An unusual request, but legally sound given these documents. I'll grant a preliminary order recognizing the reversion pending full review. The HOA common properties shall be considered provisionally redistributed to current deed holders until final determination. As the implications of this ruling dawned on Walter, he lunged toward me. You've ruined everything, he shouted as court officers restrained him. Mr. Jenkins, you're in contempt, the judge declared. Officers, remove him from my courtroom. As Walter was escorted out, still shouting threats, Judge Ortiz made one final ruling. Given the evidence of potential criminal activity, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation. Court is adjourned until the forensic audit is complete. Outside the courthouse, our neighbors erupted in celebration. Jessica pulled me aside, her expression serious despite our victory. There's one more thing you should know, she said quietly. That reversion clause doesn't just apply to the common areas. If the HOA failed to maintain the conservation easement, which they clearly did by attempting to develop it, the clause has a penalty provision. All property rights revert to the homeowners in common. What does that mean exactly? I asked. Jessica's smile was triumphant. It means that legally, you and your neighbors now potentially have ownership interest in every single property in Meadowbrook, including the Jenkins home. The full magnitude of our victory began to sink in. Walter hadn't just lost control of the HOA. He'd potentially handed us ownership rights to everything, including his own property. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking: FBI raids offices of county officials in development corruption probe. Walter's political connections were crumbling in real time. The tide hadn't just turned, it had become a tsunami. 6 months after that fateful court hearing, Meadowbrook Estates was transformed. The community center, once Walter's fortress of power, hosted a neighborhood picnic on a perfect autumn day. Children played on the newly installed playground where concrete footers had once threatened to become a strip mall. The nature preserve remained pristine, now protected by an irrevocable conservation trust. Eleanor, serving as the elected chair of our new homeowners cooperative, clinked a glass for attention. Before we dig into this amazing food, I want to recognize the person who saved our community. Daniel Morgan could have just fought for his own property, but instead, he fought for all of us. She raised her glass toward me. To Daniel, whose stubbornness may have saved us millions in property values. The crowd laughed and applauded. I felt a blush creeping up my neck as I stood to acknowledge their thanks. I just wanted to keep my garden, I joked, earning more laughter. But seriously, this victory belongs to all of us who refuse to be bullied. The final resolution had been more satisfying than any of us could have imagined. The forensic audit revealed that Walter and Deborah had embezzled over $1.2 million from HOA funds over 15 years. The district attorney filed 37 criminal charges against them, including fraud, embezzlement, falsifying public records, and criminal conspiracy. More shocking were the corruption charges filed against 3 county officials who have accepted bribes to fast-track the commercial development. The FBI investigation uncovered a web of corruption extending to the state level, with the developer, Pinnacle, at the center. Judge Ortiz's final ruling had upheld the reversion clause in its entirety. Each homeowner received legal title to their equal share of all common areas. More significantly, because Walter had violated the conservation easement, the penalty provision was triggered, giving each homeowner a 1/125th ownership interest in every property in Meadowbrook. In practical terms, this meant no single property could be sold or developed without unanimous consent from all homeowners, making Walter's commercial development scheme impossible. The Jenkins' spectacular downfall came swiftly. Facing prison time, they accepted a plea deal that required full restitution of stolen funds, forfeiture of their Meadowbrook property, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board. Their mansion, once the showpiece of the neighborhood, was sold at auction, with proceeds distributed to all homeowners as damages. Our new cooperative governance model eliminated the hierarchical HOA structure entirely. Basic community standards were maintained through simple majority votes, with a supermajority required for any significant changes. Annual dues were reduced by 60% once the inflated contracts with Jenkins-owned companies were terminated. As I mingled at the picnic, Eleanor introduced me to an elderly woman I hadn't met before. "This is Margaret Wilson, the original developer's widow," Eleanor explained. "She's the one who warned me about the reversion clause years ago, but I never thought we'd need it." Margaret shook my hand warmly. "My husband always distrusted HOAs," she said. "He insisted on that clause as insurance against exactly the kind of power grab Walter attempted. I'm so pleased it protected the community as intended." Later, as the sun began to set, I walked along the nature preserve with Jessica, who had become a good friend through our shared battle. "Remember that strip of land Walter tried to take from you?" she asked, pointing to the flourishing wildflowers that had recolonized the area. "The final survey showed it was actually 3 feet wider than even your deed indicated." I laughed. "So in trying to steal my land, Walter actually helped me discover I owned more than I thought." "It's perfectly ironic," Jessica agreed. "His greed uncovered the very document that destroyed him. If he'd just been a reasonable HOA president, no one would have ever looked for that reversion clause." We paused at the edge of my property, my fully restored, slightly larger property, where the setting sun cast long shadows across new garden beds. "The ultimate irony," I said, "is that property values have actually increased since all this happened. Turns out, home buyers prefer communities without dictatorial HOAs." Jessica smiled. And the cherry on top. Walter and Deborah now have to live in that condo development across town. The one where Walter once said he'd rather die than live in such a poorly managed community. I heard their HOA there is extremely strict, I added with a grin. Absolutely no tolerance for breaking rules. As night fell, neighbors lingered, sharing stories and making plans for community improvements. Children caught fireflies in jars, while parents chatted on blankets spread across the common lawn. The invisible barriers that had once divided us. Walter's deliberate strategy of keeping neighbors suspicious of each other had dissolved. In the ultimate act of community healing, we voted to use the reclaimed HOA funds to establish a legal aid foundation for other neighborhoods fighting corrupt homeowners associations. The Meadowbrook case had already become a precedent cited in similar battles across the state. That night, as I fell asleep to the peaceful sounds of crickets chirping in my fully restored backyard, I reflected on the journey. What began as a fight to protect my small patch of land had evolved into something far more meaningful: the reclamation of an entire community. Walter had thought he was stealing my land. Instead, the judge had handed me, and every other homeowner, the deeds to all 125 homes in Meadowbrook Estates. Not to own individually, but to steward collectively, ensuring that no single person could ever again wield such tyrannical power over our neighborhood. The following week, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the Patels, the family who had been driven out the previous year. "We've heard what happened at Meadowbrook," they wrote. "Thank you for standing up when we couldn't. Because of you, other families will never experience what we did." They included a packet of wildflower seeds, the same variety that had started this whole saga. Their note read simply, "For your garden. May they always remind you that beautiful things can grow from difficult beginnings." As I scattered those seeds along my expanded property line, I smiled at the thought of Walter Jenkins sitting in his sterile condo, receiving violation notices for having the wrong color curtains or leaving his shoes in the hallway. Sometimes, justice doesn't just prevail, it comes with a perfect twist of irony. The nature preserve behind our homes would remain untouched forever. The strip mall would never materialize. And the 125 families of Meadowbrook Estates had discovered something more valuable than property appreciation. We'd found the true meaning of community. Sometimes you have to fight for your land, and sometimes, when you do, you end up with something far greater than the piece of earth you were trying to protect. You end up with a home, and neighbors worth fighting alongside. The end.